Tonight, your guest speaker is the internationally published me. And yes, strangely, that happened. In my previous career, I used to write a lot of analysis of various military operations from other countries. And a couple of the countries liked what I had written so much, they scarfed it up, published it in their periodicals, and so I am internationally published. Woo! You know, that doesn't help me get Starbucks coffee at all for free. I know, sucks. It is indeed. All right, so when I said that this was not going to be what you thought it was, we are not going to talk technical stuff. This is mostly the psychology of writing a paper.
I really could have used this last week.
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Thought I'd done it last week.
I'm throwing the book at you.
Yeah, well.
This is for don't eat these.
They're for who?
Yes.
Oh. Yeah. So, as I said, we're going to talk about the psychology of writing papers, not the technical part. So, we'll start with when you conceive of writing a paper, there are three Venn diagram circles that are important. Your interests, your reader's interests, and your sources. They all three have to meld. If you only have two, or one, heaven forbid, it's a no-go. There is no two that makes it a successful paper. Gotta be in the middle.
Yeah.
Well, it helps. At least for the first stages, most important thing is your interest. Does this thing that you're going to write about pique your interest? Does it light your fire? Does it motivate you? First paper that I wrote was why 1600? Because that motivated me. And it started with a musketeer, a medieval knight, and a Greek hoplite try to walk into an SCA bar. Two get in, one doesn't. Which one?
The musketeer, right?
Now, should it be that way? Nope. Based on the social construct of what the SCA at that time said it was about, the Greek should be left out. He didn't know what feudalism was, didn't have a king, there were no dukes, no counts, no knights, none of that. There was also no church. The musketeer, on the other hand, lived at the end of the feudal era, but he knew what it was. And if he was French, oh my God, he still labored under it. He had a king. He had all the dukes and counts you'd want to shake a stick at, and then some. And oh my God, did he have the church. So why did they pick 1600? No. You're close, though.
Approximately
Why 1600 though?
They rounded, but okay, honestly, they wanted to go with 1500, but all of their wives were like, no, we want to wear the cool dresses.
Yeah.
And so they pushed it to 1600, and then they put this stupid, meaningless line in there about pre-gunpowder Europe. Hate to break this news to you, but gunpowder had been defining the outcomes of wars for 150 years before then. So, thank you for playing. Even further back. But as far as deciding wars, the 100 Years' War, ending phases determined by gunpowder. When the French could trot cannons out and enfilade the longbowmen, game over. And they could. By the way, that's a, I hate to say it, supporting point for the new peerage to be. The guys who came up with mobile artillery, the Bureau brothers, the crown ennobled them, gave them titles, and gave them lands and reward for basically winning the 100 Years' War for France. So there's your precedence. Unlike the rapier period, it's got actual historical precedence. So anyway, so that was, you see, I'm still excited about why 1600. So as you look at what you want to write about, also look at, does it light up your audience? And boy, at that time, 1600 musketeers, oh yeah, it lit people up. I once showed up at an event in full cavalier, and my Laurel friend had to pull her husband back in the car because he was going to have words with me about it being post period. So, yeah. And resources, oh God, for that, they're all over the place out there. So it was, I'm not going to say a perfect thing to write about, but it kept me motivated. I had an audience, and oh my God, did I have sources. The major problem was keeping it under 40 pages or more, because you can go to music, architecture, arts, military, political. And what my basic premise ended up being is 1650, you have the execution of a king by his subjects, by legal means. You have the end of the 30 Years' War, which marks, yes, Europe will be Catholic and Protestant. Yes, France will be top dog in Europe. Yes, the empire will just remain a fragmented bunch of little states. That's where you end it, in my opinion. So, that's a kind of a general idea of how you kind of look at what it is you want to write about, gauge your audience, gauge your sources.
How do you figure out if you have enough sources available?
So I go into my vast library and go, here, 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 here.
And if you can't do that, then you're like, gosh.
Aubrey, can you? No. That, can you get into the UT library?
I don't have anybody who cannot get to the UT library. Hit me up.
There you go. Because a good, reputable university library. Yeah. And kind of peruse what they've got, and they'll tell you.
Oh, I don't know.
I think you can.
I think you can.
Yeah.
You should be able to search the database without needing a card.
Okay. So
I think you can also do interlibrary loans.
I've borrowed some really bizarre things to interlibrary loan. It's like you let that out of a vault, and I get to touch it. I'll never send it back. Oh, tell you.
The dog ate the book.
Yeah, me blathering about a paper I wrote a long time ago, and basically, when you look at beginning a paper, there are 3 sets of things to look at. Does it motivate you? Does it motivate your audience? Can you find sources to support your paper? If you can only do 2 out of 3, punt and do something else. Now,
So your first stop for sources is call Aubrey.
no. Do you want to do a search of a university library?
Basically, see what you already have available.
That's one.
Collecting things already. And then search an academic library.
Yes. Now, as far as things to write and things not to write, generally speaking, a paper should have something that you're saying, Richard III didn't murder his nephews. That's your premise. Mm-hmm. Up front. If I'm reading your paper, I want to know what it's about up front. That lets me go through with an idea of what you're doing.
Related.
Yes.
How do you feel about the concept of abstracts?
I love them.
Okay. Have suggestions.
No, yeah, it should not be more than probably 2/3 of a page. I'd like it less. Yes, basically. Yes.
Elevator pitch.
Yes.
Conversation.
Now, what that rules out is a story paper. What do I mean by story paper?
Like a travel guide,
Worse than that.
travelogue.
I once wrote what I assumed was the masterpiece of all papers ever written. It documented the rise and the apogee and the fall of Valois Burgundy in nauseating detail. And I submitted that puppy and I waited for my 50 to come. My 50 didn't even breathe hard.
I'm assuming that is a reference to the
Score.
score sheet.
Yes.
Okay.
At that time, they were 50s. It was
Okay.
the top one.
Okay.
And as I read through the commentary, I'm like, yeah, that scratched the back of my head the entire time that I was putting it together. Listen to yourself. When yourself says, this might not be what you think it is, listen. The most cogent comment, and there were a bunch in the judging sheet, was, you have 3 fine papers here. Why did you make them one? So, theme. Have a theme that runs through. I had 3, rise, apogee, and fall.
Do you think there's ever a point to having, I don't know what you would call it, but like an introductory paper, the grant application version of your paper where you're like, I want to write about these 3 things.
Funny you should talk about that.
Uh-huh.
That's the first part of this,
Okay.
which is a series of papers on the Byzantine military.
Uh-huh.
But the first one is, hi, this is Byzantine military. It's cool because, by the way, this is not really anything more than a foreword. We're going to get into the interesting stuff later.
Okay. Do you think that is ever a appropriate
By itself?
submission by itself?
No.
Okay.
No, because you're basically, if you're doing it, quote unquote, the right way, it's almost a shotgun. And I don't have any further papers to give me context about what you're saying, because you're going to go into more detail in your later papers.
Right.
But you're going to make me have questions that I won't answer right then.
So if it's not directly tied to the rest of the content, then, okay.
Correct. Hit him in the head and knock him out so we can move on. So, theme. Have a theme, have a premise. One per paper. And make sure when I get to the end of your paper, you've proven your premise. Because there is nothing worse than a well-constructed paper that you get to the end of it and you go, maybe Richard did kill his nephews after all. So, don't be afraid to change your premise if, as you research, you find the sources don't support your initial finding. Because most of us will go into a paper with something to prove. We already have an opinion, and we're marshaling the sources to prove our point. Yes.
What if you just think something's neat and you want to learn more about it? How would you construct that paper if you don't have a thesis?
Give me an example.
Like, if you decide you want to learn about the, for example, first, or rather, oldest existing botanical garden attached to a university.
Okay.
You don't necessarily have a point to prove about it. You're just like, I like gardens, I like universities. I like stuff that's in period. Perhaps I will have enjoyment from learning about this thing. And if I'm pulling all these sources and information together, I might as well put it in a format that somebody could read about later.
And when I take that extra step and say, and this is how you would construct one or create one.
Okay.
And now your premise becomes, this is how you do it.
Aubrey, I love you so much. I have a paper I have to write for school for a class that is the paper for the class. That is the information I needed. That is the
I told you
that
to
is
come to this class.
that is the exact phrasing that I needed for that class paper.
That is what I needed last week when I wrote my paper on the first
I'm so sorry.
botanical garden at the University of Padova. But
This is why I was
No,
looking to drive
I
up
was
to
like,
Austin
I
for
should
all
in
this
fact, I
class.
should go to this class. That was what I needed.
yeah, okay.
So the coolest things I ever judged so far as a Laurel was at Gulf War. And this lady had created an Italian garden on a trailer. And she called it my mobile serenity. And I know it was mobile because she lived in the East Kingdom and we were in Mississippi. And the dang thing was right there.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's amazing.
Oh no, what was amazing was the paper was excellent and the blueprints, of which there were a bunch of copies, were fantastic. She showed you how to create what she had created with variations for your general climate. So I don't know if that helps at all,
Yes.
but it
So
was
basically,
awesome.
if you're like, man, I think this thing might be neat,
Yes,
take that and sharpen it.
Yeah, make it a how-to.
Into an action.
make it a how-to.
Okay, make it a how-to.
This is how you can have that garden in your backyard.
Okay. Thank you for asking
Oh.
that question.
You
By the
hire
way-
dozens of employees. This is what you do.
How to.
Oh my, this would be useful tomorrow.
Thank you for asking that question. That was the information that I've been agonizing over for the past 4 weeks.
Awesome.
Okay, so now you've got
Okay.
the thing that interests you. You're pretty sure you're going to get the audience. And we'll say, for the sake of argument, your sources support your premise. What do you do now?
You start a ridiculous document of chaos where you
No. That is-
have
that is
annotated
not what you
Annotate
do.
those
You do
bibliographies.
that, but that's later. First, outline.
Okay. That's reasonable.
Yep, outline. 1, 2, 3, 4, A, B, C, D, and use it as the skeleton to build your paper on.
Okay.
And be prepared to cut, move, and paste as you go. Because you'll find things in sources that will make you take that point that you thought was 4, and instead it's 2.
you thought you could just lump all of the timeline into one section, but it turns out
Yes.
it flows better if you talk about this.
Anything about the
aspect.
Wars of the Roses goes that way because you're dealing with 3 different branches of the English royal family temporally through generations. And
You try to do a straight chronological.
yeah, you can't. You got to go boop, 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 back and forth. But when you outline it, you may outline it with each branch, father to son to grandson, and then find that you're going to cut and paste things to make them more this generation, and that generation. The outline will save your lives.
Hard agree.
A PowerPoint for me is an outline. And a PowerPoint can be equivalent.
No.
My bullet point.
Oh.
What about a picture?
We're going to get to that.
Okay. Then I'm going to show
Oh
you.
yeah, I want to ask about that.
Yep. We're gonna talk about that.
Can I just see your bound copy?
Of which one?
The one on top.
Oh no. I'm gonna give you the one I did for my wife.
Whichever one is a fully contained thing.
How to take SCA battles and make them applicable to the rapier field. So we weren't going to get to that yet, but we'll move on as if you finish the paper.
Sorry, I got distracted by thinking about appendices.
If there are more related subjects, let's say. For instance, here, for her, she was going to be melee commander, and I'm always yammering at her about great battles from the period. And she's like, how's this going to help me? And so I said, Lepanto. And she goes, Pavia. And I go, no, Lepanto. Think about it. Galleys are like rapier fighters. They face a direction. They can only influence things in an arc about like that. And they only move forward and backwards. And they face in one direction and they fight in lines. And you can group them into groups of lines, but they're eventually going to resolve into fighting each other online. So Lepanto, one wing pinned its opponents up against the edge of the field, we'll call it. They called it Greece. And ran them up on the rocks and neutralized them entirely. The center held. This flank they lost, but those guys went scrambling off the field, and the reserve came up and plugged the hole. It so happened at the war that year, I ended up on the left with a fighter named Aurelia and a few of the Northerners, and we pinned their wing up against the ropes and pushed them off the world. And I turned, I went, Lepanto! across the field at her. So, and I found that there were other battles that had things that you could learn from on the SCA melee field. There was one where two armies were fighting in the fog. They started like this. Somehow they ended up like this. While they were doing this, one wing broke the other one, chased them off the field, came back into the back of their own army, thought that the flag there was the sun in splendor, but no, it was the star streaming, and they fired on their own guys, which broke the army entirely, and they lost. In the second battle that my wife was in charge of, we did that. We did a full 180, and me and some of the backfield stood there and watched it and waited, and then ran up on the backs of the army that was now not our army.
No.
It was hilarious.
Okay, so outlines.
So back out, but so don't be afraid to plan future papers that are tied in series to one or ones that you've already done. Outlines.
I didn't have a question.
Oh,
I do have a question.
yes.
Where is stuff like this published somewhere that's easy to find, or do it take someone like you collecting that?
It was at one point because I got them printed, but I have no idea where they are now.
Do you have like a digital version?
Somewhere, I hope so,
Yeah.
because my arms are all over it. So you're talking about pictures. Yeah, have pictures. Pictures, pictures explain a lot of things, especially maps. There is nothing worse than trying to explain to someone that Lorraine was an independent duchy and not a part of France throughout the entire period. But it's in France. No, it's not. Look at any map in the period. It's in the empire, but it's a sovereign state. Blah, 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 blah. So make it easier on your readers where you can illustrate your point with a picture, especially if you're doing a how-to. Because right now I'm struggling with a thing in Fiore where he says, do this, do that, turn the sword in your hand, shove it in his face. Turn the sword in his hand. Turn it, turn it,
Yeah.
turn
Rotate
it.
it, revolve it.
What do you mean? Picture would help. So, save your readers some aggravation. Now, the hardest thing you may find in a paper is staying motivated, getting to the end of the process. So, what do you do to keep yourselves motivated?
Have a deadline.
Keep finding weird and new resources. tell people that I'm going to do the thing because then they're so.
That's an excellent way to procrastinate.
Suffer.
Well, that's how you drag yourself across the line. Yes.
Suffer.
So what I do is I'll find music from that place in that period, and I'll have that going. If I can find a movie in my collection from that place in that period, every so often I'll watch it. Like, why 1600? I watched the darn 73, 74, 3 and 4 Musketeers probably 20 times putting that paper together.
Is that the one with Michael York
Yeah, it's the only one that really counts. The costuming is right.
and Charlton Heston was?
Well, yeah, the Cardinal. So, but sometimes you've got to play these little tricks to keep yourself motivated.
How long would you say you typically like? What's the lifespan of a paper? From when you first start writing, not from like conception of I'd like to write about this thing. I know it's impossible to say, but if the answer is sometimes I bang out the whole thing in a week, and sometimes it sits on the naughty shelf for 10 years.
In here, there is a thing I have been working on since the first time that a crown who will remain nameless came to the throne. And I will tell you the name of this work is The Art of Survival in the Court of a Hostile Prince.
Ooh. Fascinating.
And it is written in a Machiavellian style. And I use Machiavelli and Guicciardini and that other guy, Richelieu, even though he lives after my time, as my primary guides. Probably, that wasn't the Laurel when I started it, so 8 or 9 years. It is a whopping 17 pages long so far. Because I don't have enough hostile princes, dang it.
Sounds like it was maybe a stress project.
It was, and now it's just this kind of idle joke.
Yeah.
That at Collegium I'm probably going to teach as if it were a real book. Just because. But so yeah, I mean literally it can be as short as a week. 8 or 9 years. This is an exception.
How long do you give yourself like to do to crawl over the finish line? If you're like, I absolutely have to have this paper finished by Collegium or whatever.
3 months.
Okay.
3 months.
How long do you usually spend on research?
2.5 months.
Okay. So like 6-month process.
Or is it 2.5 months of the 3 months?
Nope.
No, okay.
Yeah.
Question for you.
I'll give you a weird answer.
Because it depends on your job also. As an applications research scientist with a company, I have to look at data and information and process and get reports out within a week. So I learned to basically go over the standard outline and get out of my own way, and then go back and reread. And I got
Don't do that. Don't do that
Well,
on that time frame.
But that's how
I
I do.
struggled writing this research paper because it's been so long since I've written a research paper, forgot that the research part of it takes as
It should be honestly
long, at
the
least.
longest part.
Yeah, it takes like 60% of the time.
I am
Because normally I am looking at data and I am digesting it and putting it into a format to achieve a very specific goal, which is like way more streamlined than doing a research paper of my own design.
And then sometimes you'll find that you go into your project with a preconceived idea. Richard III didn't kill his nephews. 1. Introduction. 2. Relationship between Richard and Edward, father of the princes. 3. Relationship between Richard and the Woodvilles. 4. Edward dies. 5, Woodvilles are going to kill Richard. 6, oops, maybe Richard killed the nephews because they were baby Woodvilles. Oops. Okay. Well, so much for that premise.
So you go rewrite that intro.
Yeah, rewrite that intro. But that's if you write your outline out early based on what you think is going on, as you research, you'll either support it or you'll rewrite it. But it gives you direction. And it gives you an organization that probably won't be what you end up with, but you'll still build on it in ways. Now, the fun part. You're done. You have written the end. What do you do now? You've run it through grammar check, you've run it through spell check. What do you do now?
You ask your really nice Laurel friend Aubrey to proofread it for you.
No.
No, because if you do that, then he can't judge it.
That's true.
First, you do some sort of relaxing activity, and then you read your paper again.
No.
Take a nap, have a glass of wine, whatever. Play with the dog.
Then you go and you find someone who knows about your subject. You go, read this and tell me if it makes sense. And they'll go through it, and if you're misusing terminology or there needs to be some clarifications based on their understanding of the subject, then
should you also have a person who does not know what they're talking about?
We're getting to that.
Yeah.
So once you have now made those corrections and updates, yeah, you hand your paper on creating a metal sword to me, and I go, made out of iron. That's nice. And then when they get to the end of it, if they can go, I understand how you got there. I probably can't do it myself, but I understand your process. Then you're fine.
Okay. So it'd be a knowledgeable review and then a layman review?
Yes. Because you want to make sure if you're doing a how-to paper that the process makes sense to someone who doesn't do what you do. I once judged a bag that started its life on the back of a sheet, and the lady did all of the steps. And at the end of the paper, I'm like, I can't do this, but I see how you did. That's really darn cool. And that's the effect you want, although a better one is, I could do that now. It's going to look like crap, but I could do it.
Yeah.
But either one of those are acceptable.
Okay.
And I consider them both to be A+ responses. Because I will never do metalworking. But I can understand if the paper is written properly, how they got from A to Z with that sword. Okay, psychologically. You've now done all of that. And you're feeling pretty good about that paper. What do you do now? And it's 4 weeks till whatever you're submitting it to.
Try not to think about it.
Think about it a lot.
No.
Think about it a lot.
Put it up on a shelf. Mix the really coolest drink that you know of.
The strongest alcohol I got.
Drink it. Oh, by the way, have a spare copy of the paper. And then pull the paper down and see if it makes sense now.
Okay.
If it does, you're probably okay, and you can submit that puppy.
It still makes you happy after reading the next days. Those days.
None of my reading ever makes me happy when I read it.
No, it doesn't. I may have gone into that paper really wanting Richard III to have not killed his nephews. And at the end, I get to it, and the preponderance of evidence says he did. Well, it's not like I'm going to cover that up. No, that's not scholarship.
I know. But that doesn't mean they didn't kill him.
But they're not you.
Evidence.
Well, for the Richard thing, no court in the world would find the man guilty. But the one question in a situation like this that you always ask, who profits from it? If the nephews disappear, who profits from it?
Richard?
That's one. Who else?
I don't know enough about the situation.
If Richard doesn't off them and they're alive when Henry Tudor shows up at the Tower of London, now whose interest is it in to kill the kids?
Henry Tudor's?
Yeah.
Fascinating by this sudden twist. Wow.
Yeah. If they're still alive,
I don't
they
know
have a
enough
better
about this.
they have a better claim to the throne than he does.
Fascinating.
I feel like I've been murder mystery.
It is an interesting topic that they've not been able to establish who killed this rightful king of England and his younger brother.
I'd love to read your paper on this.
No, I didn't go down that road because I know that I am too close to it.
Yeah.
I think Henry Tudor did it. I think those boys were still alive somewhere. And 1485. Yeah. Yep. Henry VII, who, to top it all off, married the boy's sister.
Oof.
So he's Henry Tudor is either innocent or he is one of the most evil mofos in the Middle Ages. Because he could off two kids and marry their sister and not blink an eye and end up with Henry VIII out of the deal. Maybe that was his reward.
So let's say you were in the Sensu and started fighting, because there's a lot of battles, a lot of generals that still read them. And I'm sure that there are a lot of Western commanders that got word of Sensu and Marco Polo. Because some of the
Possibly, but you never see it.
one of these days go to the Vatican and go through the archives, because I know this.
So who do you think the armies of Charlemagne use as their template for how to fight?
Don't tell me the origin.
Now,
Let's go back earlier. The Romans versus the
who?
Romans.
Which Roman? It's a Roman.
Oh, a bunch of Caesars.
Nope. One guy published a tactics manual that also dealt with logistics and other crap.
It's got to be.
Guy named Vegetius, and what he talks about are clowns with round shields and spears and leatherish boots and whatever they could find for clothing. That's the Roman army in his time. Not the dudes with loricas and crusted helms and big square shields. That stuff was long dead. Which, by the way, that was a calculated aside. Know your primary sources. Most people, when they visualize something like the late Roman army, they're thinking army of the Caesars. It looked more like the guys that they were fighting coming over the Rhine than it looked like Caesar's army. The only people that had armies that looked like Caesar's in that time were the Byzantines, because they were the only surviving Romans. And even theirs, not so much. But know your primary sources. And know the bias of your primary sources. There's a source by a guy named Mancini, who was in the court of Henry Tudor and also in the court of Richard III. And he wrote an account of what he thought happened. But when did he write it?
During the court of Henry Tudor?
Uh-huh. So who's he getting paid by?
Henry Tudor.
So who do you think he says off the nephews?
Wasn't Henry Tudor.
It was not. Same thing with Thomas More. Who's he work for? Henry VIII. Who's Henry's daddy? Henry Tudor. Same thing with Shakespeare.
So if there's a movie or thing you've seen that is obviously drawing from period sources, how feasible is it to contact them and figure out what ones they were using?
How hell's the movie?
Don't know. I'm asking for generals.
Yeah. If it's within the last few years, sure, give it a shot.
Okay.
If it's, I'd say 5 years or more, those people have moved on to other projects,
Yeah.
making room for the new stuff.
Okay. How hard is tracking back somebody else's work compared to looking for it yourself?
I'm always a supporter of looking for it yourself. You want to control the narrative. You want to know your sources, how you acquired them, what they say. There was a guy who was roaming through the National Library of France, and you don't really wander through it. You tell them what you want. And so he told them what he wanted, and they brought him some stuff. And he opens one of them, and he finds out this is not what this cover says it is.
Oh no.
This cover says it's a 17th century rapier manual by some French dude that none of us have ever heard of. This is 15th century. This is Fiore, and I have never seen this version before.
Oh.
Because they repackaged it somewhere in the 18th century. The fencing manual got tossed, and this loose bound Fiore version got bound and shoved into that bookshelf. So know your sources. Open the first page. Make sure you've got what you think you have. Because yeah, it's rare, but sometimes you're not going to get what you think you got. Finally. 1600. What do you guys think? 1600 is it a good cutoff? Why?
It's fine, I guess. I don't know.
I think that 1650 is probably more appropriate.
Honestly, I mentally fudged it to 1650. I agree that 1650 is probably. I guess that answers my.
So you're going to tell me that a guy in Neanderthal hides can come to an SCA event, but some guy who's crossed the ocean and come back can't?
I assume so.
That's what you're telling me.
That's
Neanderthal.
That's the colonization.
I could dress as an amoeba and come to an SCA event based on what's written.
You should do
You
that.
can.
You should do that.
I've been tempted.
Which colonization?
Yeah, which one?
Spanish and Portuguese at that point were basically going that way. I also have a relative. I traced
Yeah,
all the way
tell
back
me, so
back
who
then
discovered
to the
America?
Dutch West India Company.
Native Americans
There
are the first people.
There was a lot of back and forth.
Depends on how far back you want to go and who
Yep.
discovered America.
Morris were here a lot
Traced back
longer
to the
No,
Not
Native
before
Americans.
the Native Americans, but before Columbus,
Yeah,
yes.
before Columbus sourced it first. Native Americans were the first Homo sapiens to step foot
Arguably the
on
Japanese.
American soil.
Jamon pottery. Yeah, yeah. I read that article too.
Japanese.
And they found evidence of Jamon pottery,
There's also a bunch
which is some of the oldest pottery in the world, on the South American coast. Now,
How do you spell the name of that pottery stuff?
Jomon, that's the culture.
since they 3 or 4 teachers were.
And it is some of the oldest pottery on earth.
If you find it, send it my way.
I will definitely remember.
All right, so this ambling
So
journey down the psychology of a paper. Any questions other than why did you burn this hour of my life that I'll never be able to get back?
No, you helped me so much more than you could know.
How long is the bare minimum versus too long? And
Okay.
where's the sweet spot?
All right. So these are general guidelines to which there are a ton of exceptions. One, long enough to cover the subject. Two,
Long enough to answer your
don't give me a 20-page paper unless it is truly fascinating.
It should probably, if it's longer than like 10, it should probably be 2 papers. What's your feelings on appendices?
I am okay with them, but it should be obvious to me why you didn't put that in the paper. Which basically, it's a footnote that's too long, and so it's an appendix.
Okay. It's not enough to be a separate paper.
Right.
But it's too much of a diversion from the main content. But I thought it was really neat, and maybe other people would like to read that.
Yep.
And I wrote it already, so it's going at the end.
Yep. And it's only a page, so suck it up, Buttercup. Yeah. So, I once got a 47-page paper. It was probably the best paper I've ever read because it dealt with physical exercise in support of martial combat from the 4th Dynasty Egypt to 1600.
Holy shit. Nice and niche, narrow.
But they were able to show how it all built on the previous set of things. Even if that stuff didn't survive in writing knowingly to the next generations, somehow there were depictions. So that one, and the 47 counts his abstract, his annotated bibliography, and all of that. But still, 47 pages. It was not a snoozer.
You're reading a good book.
Pretty much. But it was adequate for what he was doing. In fact, I criticized him for leaving a couple of things out. The Byzantines, for instance. But, so, when you've got a long paper, yeah, look at it and see if it has more than one theme. And then you could cut it into 2. And it also needs to be able to stand alone if you do that. If it can't, then it does belong with its sibling section. But if it can survive out there by itself without the other half the paper, cut it in half. So once again, the rise of the Valois Dukes of Burgundy could have been its own paper. The Apogee could have been its own paper. The Fall definitely could have been its own paper. I don't need the other pieces for that last one to make sense. I can summarize what happened in those two papers in 5 sentences, and we move on.
If you don't trust me, here's the other papers. Yeah.
Actually, yeah, in here I chopped it up into 3 pieces.
Okay.
So what else?
I think you've more or less covered the questions that I have.
And this was a little seat of the pants, but psychology of a paper kind of is that. It literally depends on what you guys are doing. Yes.
What do you do with the paper after it's been judged? After you've submitted it? What does one do with paper?
Was it Kingdom A&S?
Sure.
Then you can never use it again.
Okay.
You can
That's the pinnacle.
If it was anything else,
have it actually published in actual journals. That's what you can do with it.
that too, if it was that good. But if you didn't submit it for Kingdom A&S, if it was some other thing, take the comments you got, improve it, submit it again.
To another competition of the same or higher level?
Yes.
Okay.
Just know if you put it into Kingdom A&S, it's done. You can never use it again.
Bring it out to LPT as a heading Z project.
Yep. Once you've gone to Steps Artisan and it got that whatever the high score is these days, then send it to Kingdom A&S. And if it's good and it's a subject that you like and there are related topics, build a series around it.
Okay.
Could you do it like in a complete anachronist or
Yep.
article?
Martin did.
Yeah, that's my other question.
Yeah,
Is like,
Martin
is there already infrastructure for Scadians who don't want to go through the academic submission process but want to have their paper accessible for other?
As Maeve said, the complete anachronist.
Okay.
And Martin is your guy to talk to. He's the guy that has most recently that I know gotten a paper published there.
Okay.
So he's gone through the process. He can tell you where
Okay.
it's at.
But there's no like digital repository for papers.
Not that I know of,
I
although
mean, there's that, you know,
That would be a good
class
project, though.
handout thing, but it's not
yeah.
really.
I mean, some authors will
No, I
maintain
know. I don't have time for that. I don't got
either an
time for that.
online or Google Drive repository of their papers. I mean, mine used to be on Facebook, and then I went to Facebook.
I'm like, that was a lovely project.
Also, on occasion, like the Black Star will put out, like I know they're doing a special publication where they'll call for arts and science articles or articles on.
Well, and whoever's in charge of the bgwlad newsletter can also publish your paper.
Or your abstract, or either everything.
Right. Yeah. If you want to read more about it.
You can actually talk to Webmaster about it. It's done officially for SCA.
Thank you.
Not you.
No,
Not you specifically.
No, yeah. Women.
I check for people since back order.
Thank you, Aubrey. You were very helpful.
Well, I'm glad. 'Cause I had my doubts
despairing.
about this.
I'm still despairing. I'm just despairing less.
In a different way.
I'm despairing with an avenue of going forward that I can maybe finish this paper and get a grade on it now.
So talk to me about it.
Yeah, so the topic was whatever we wanted.
Mhm.
So I got to pick whatever I wanted, and I wanted to do something about like clothing in the medieval period. I was thinking